Chapter 31, Carl contributes. Lord Latimer's Ladies by Margaret Elin Schmidt and Dan McLaughlin, read by Dan McLaughlin. Chapter 31, Carl contributes. As if on cue, the door swung open and Reginald Shield himself walked into the room. Everyone turned to glare at him, and he instinctively flung up his hands in self-defense. "What did I do? It wasn't me. I meant no harm," he said in rapid succession. My lord." It was an understandably stressful space to be walking into. Not only was everyone glaring in frustration, but the house seemed to be humming with an unspent power that put even the largest of the valets carefully cultivated Leyden jars to shame. As for Lord Latimer, it must have been a shock to see that man who had been exchanging sarcastic witticisms with his sister was now too ill to stand. Waving a hand, Brian barely managed to reclaim the attention of the ladies. "Don't be angry with him," he said, weakly but audibly. "He recited it all to me last night, but this morning I was just distracted. I just gave you part of it." "Really?" Alice turned her indignation on her brother. He managed the ghost of a mischievous smile. "My bad." Alice's glare was tempered with sisterly exasperation, and she shared it generously around the room until it came to rest again upon Reginald. "Then perhaps Mr. Shield would be kind enough to share the rest of the riddle with us," she said flatly. "I have to do it from the start," said Reginald, nervously stepping away from the doorway while trying to simultaneously steer clear of the cracked window panes to the south and the irate ladies in the center of the room. He was only partially successful and finally gave up and assumed a pose fit for reciting bad poetry. To the watch you must turn to see the face of God you yearn. The book that which you must find describes a world which is finally designed. That is the part I already told them, said Brian weakly. And I provided the book, said Eliza. That should have been sufficient. Her voice rose upwards, turning what should have been a certainty into a question. In answer, the house slammed something twice, a firm negative. Reginald continued, Look not in the works of Hume. One needs together like a bride and groom. There was a pause as everyone first waited for him to continue with another couplet or two. Then, when no more rhymes seemed to be forthcoming, try to figure out how this meager bit of information was supposed to clarify things. That's it, said the valet. I don't understand, said Eliza in her role as chief puzzler. The riddle clearly pointed to a very specific book. And then what? The key word is both, said Alice. We need both, like a bride and groom. But it doesn't make any sense, protested Lenora. And I don't mean in just a bad poetry way either. If we're to keep Hume in mind, but not look at his works, what are we meant to be doing? And both of what? Iris asked irritably, finding riddles not as much fun now that Brian was struggling for consciousness. Let's hear it again, Reginald, Alice said. The valet sighed, but recited dutifully, Look not in the works of David Hume. One needs both together like a bride and groom. I'm afraid there really is no more. I wish there were. I've been studying it for years now, trying to make sense of it. Well, if your housekeeper intended to make these supposed clues impossible to solve, she's done her master work here, said Lenora with feeling. The house gave off a series of rattle, bangs, and creaks. Dust shivered down on them. A music stand in the corner fell over, and the chandelier over the piano rattled. Obviously, the castle was trying to tell them something, and was not alone in its frustration at being unable to do so clearly. After some nervous laughter, which seemed the best response to an irate, cognizant house. Eliza gave a gasp and said suddenly in a tone of discovery, "Oh my, this sounds like the game of 20. The game of 20? Asked Alice sharply, who at this point was in no who at this point was in no mood for anything other than explicit directions home. 20 questions, weakly supplied Brian. While you were gone, we taught it to Carl. Perhaps a game of 20 will provide a way for Carl to answer, Eliza explained. She didn't wait, but plunged ahead with the first question. Carl, do we need an animal, vegetable, or mineral? She asked. The house banged 4 times. Carl, explained Alice, that's how the game starts. We need to know whether we're trying to find an animal, vegetable, or mineral. So, is it 1, 2, or 3? Oh, he knows that, said Eliza. We've covered that already. The house banged 4 times. This time, all the shutters of the house struck in unison. A gust of smoke came out of the fireplace, so much like a sigh of annoyance that Alice didn't feel the need to translate. Are you saying it's none of those things? Alice asked after a respectful pause. The house banged once. What can it possibly be if it is not animal, vegetable, or mineral? Asked Eliza. I haven't the foggiest, said Alice, looking at her brother, her perpetual 20 questions partner. Unfortunately, he was in no condition to debate the possibilities. It was all he could do not to let the headache get the best of him. The wind, offered Eliza. Weather, Alice added excitedly. Climate change, Brian was trying. Carl banged his shutter twice. Everyone went silent as they thought. An idea? Interposed Lenora tentatively. Or a spirit, added Alice. An emotion, cried Eliza, who was proving quite adept at this game as well. The house banged once. The curtain billowed encouragingly. The floorboards creaked. Carl, does this emotion have something to do with solving Mrs. Downs' riddle? Eliza asked. The house banged once strongly. The second part of the riddle that Brian didn't say, clarified Alice, as one who did not care to be led off on another wild goose chase. The house banged once. Everyone in the room was concentrating except Brian, who was weakly gesturing toward his water glass. A straw would be nice, he mumbled. What was the line? Alice began, but even as she looked at Reginald, he had assumed the bad poetry pose again and recited, "Look not in the works of Hume. One needs both together, like a bride and groom." Lenora said, "Ah, are there any David Hume books in the castle? Like an etiquette manual or a wedding guide?" eagerly asked Eliza. Alice would have dashed for the door, but was forestalled by the valet. "No, believe me, I have had a great deal of time to search the library, and it has not been well stocked in the philosophy or etiquette departments." Reginald shook his head sadly. "And nothing by a person named Hume. I'm sorry." The silence of the players pressed against the strange humming of Carl's invisible engines. Lenora took out what appeared to be an account book and a pencil. "It helps me think," she explained, and paused as she began her list. "Is Mr. Hume the one who said the universe was some sort of clock?" Lenora asked. "No," whispered Brian. His eyes were closed and his body began to rock uncontrollably. "No," said Eliza, much more clearly at the same time. "I think Mr. Hume was actually very romantic. He said that the universe was not built on reason, but on sentiment." "Passion," whispered Brian. "What is it, my lord?" Iris had to bend down so she could hear, though she tried to maintain her outward calm. A tear tracked down from her eye to land on the collar of Brian's rumpled coat. He said, "Passion," Alice translated. "Oil can," whispered Brian, weaker, but smiling at having replicated another moment in film history for his sister in the secret language of siblings. He was pleased with himself. As last words went, a movie quote from their childhood appealed to him. It was his way of saying goodbye. But Alice had gone down a different cognitive path. "To the room in general," she asked. "Carl, wouldn't you say passion or sentiment or even love might be one of those intangible things that isn't animal, vegetable, or mineral?" The door banged once, and the thrumming of unseen powers in the house began to ratchet up even higher. They had almost ceased knowing it now, but the pitch was rising. The sort of feelings that might be expressed in a play? Alice asked. "One bang." "Or a melodrama?" "One bang." Brian was losing his grasp on consciousness. Alice wanted to cover her ears because the noise of the house was making her head ache. She could only believe it was worse for her brother. She couldn't hear her brother's voice, but could see him clearly. His eyes fluttered, but he reached for and caught Lady Iris's by the hand. She saw the gesture and had a wild notion. "No, wait, say the words, Brian, just one more time," Alice cried desperately to her brother. Her eyes burned with tears, but she couldn't let herself break down. Now, she had to make him understand. "Start the play, please, Brian, one more time, and it will be over, I promise." Brian's foggy gaze swept the room and found his sister. He stared at her dully. His breathing was ragged and his lips moved. It was inaudible, but they all thought he said, "I can't pay the rent." Carl slammed a door triumphantly. Alice's vision blurred. Unable to watch, she closed her eyes and felt hot tears spill over her cheeks as she prayed this would work. Somehow she knew she had to say the next line, and in a voice thick with weeping, she said, "You must pay the rent." Brian reached out, and Alice took several hurried steps to take his free hand in both of hers. "I can't pay the rent," he said. Iris gently stroked his fevered brow. "I'll pay the rent, my love," she said, and kissed him gladly. Brian said, "My hero." There was a flash of light, bright enough to make them see Spot. Eliza screamed, but the sound of it was drowned out as the humming sound of the castle ratcheted up to unbearable levels. With a roar, the candles were extinguished, leaving everyone lost in a profound and inky darkness. End of chapter 31 of Lord Latimer's Ladies, written by Margaret Elan Schmidt and Dan McLaughlin, read by Dan McLaughlin.